And we'll start in a few minutes here. We'll give people a couple minutes to show up. Welcome everyone. We're just going to give a few more minutes for everybody else to catch up here and sign in. But we are going to get started. We got a lot of material to go. So if you're late, you're going to miss some housekeeping pieces. All right, Meredith, I'll let you keep letting people in and we will get started. So I just wanted to welcome everybody today to our Iowa Child Care Connect webinar. We're going to be highlighting the work that's coming out of Iowa here. Pretty cool stuff. The dashboard, I don't know if any of you had a chance to click on that and check it out, but it's I think the power is pretty clear. Once you start to see the data, that's where things start getting exciting. That's where I start getting excited. So hopefully you all have had a chance to check it out. If not, no worries. We'll be sharing this out and it'll have a link to it. So the agenda for today, we're just going to go through some housekeeping and presenters. We're going to introduce the presenters. We'll give a quick overview of the ECE technology ecosystem vision at Opportunities Exchange, and then we'll go through a lot of the origin story that happened within the state, because I think when you see a big output like this, the work that goes into it is absolutely enormous. And I think what's happening is, as I'm looking at other states and counties, there's a lot of kind of overwhelming start point of like, where do we even start? How do we get this going? I think this will give you a little bit of insight into how this happens and what makes it successful. And then we're going to get into a demo. So we're going to go through an actual demo. If everybody could just hop on a mute here. I'll just, as you come in, and then we'll get into a demo, and then we'll get into some Q&A. So if you have any questions along the way, feel free to pop those into chat. If we can answer them as we go, we will. If not, we'll try to answer them at the end of the session here. Zoom housekeeping. So if everybody could just stay on mute for this, please use the chat, pop your questions into chat. We'll try to answer those live. And then they'll also have some time at the end for some Q&A. After this, we've got an email that'll go out to all the registrants that are here with the webinar link to the recording along with these PowerPoint slides, and we'll might have a survey as well. And then if you want, you can select the speaker view in the upper right menu of your Zoom. That might make things a little bit easier to follow along. So the presenters today. So I'm Adam Lucas. I'm the technology consultant with Opportunities Exchange. I'll be leading you through some of the intro pieces. We have Wendy. I'm going to say this, Wendy. I'm going to take a stab. Hogovine at Iowa State, the state of Iowa Child Care Policy Bureau Chief and CCDF State Administrator. We have Tammy Foley here, who's the Policy Program Manager who really ran the project. Heather Rouse from the ISU, which is a great partner to the state, and Amy, help me out here.
I wanted to listen to you struggle, Adam.
I didn't want to. I'm not even going to try to struggle.
Smigelski.
Amy Smigelski over at Resultant, who is a technology partner who made a lot of this back end work happen for Iowa. So at Opportunities Exchange, our co-founder, Louise Stoney, saw an opportunity to help providers run their businesses. She saw a big gap in terms of how they were collecting their fees, collecting the money. There was gaps in, delayed payments, things like that. So she started, I don't know, decades ago to try to help providers, and more recently realized that there's a huge opportunity for a technology overhaul within the space to really benefit the providers, the families, everyone involved. A typical provider and family experience is fragmented at best. So we have quite a lot of lines here going to quite a lot of departments within the states. As you can see here, the providers are entering data in multiple systems. They're interacting with multiple systems. They're sometimes doing this over email. Sometimes there's forms available, sometimes PDFs. It depends. What this graphic doesn't show, and that is providers are facing a lot of pain points on, is a lot of this is duplicative entry. So where you may have licensing data, it shows a single line, to CCF subsidy. There's oftentimes data that's entered twice. And that's really where the providers start to feel a lot of pain. And you know, it's never one thing. When we interview providers, it's never one thing that's the problem. It's all the little things. So what we've found here is there's an opportunity to leverage childcare management software. And this is the software systems that a lot of providers are starting to engage with and use to manage and run their businesses. The benefit to this is that all of these providers are entering data that you all need if you're in a state level organization or R&R. All the data that they're entering, you need to run subsidy, to run licensing, to do your audit checks. Everything that you need in your day-to-day is in this system. And not only that, but we're seeing ideas coming out for additional links, additional opportunities to subsidize things like wages, right? We're getting a lot of questions now about wages. So we have payroll either within the system itself or linked to an API to a third party like Augusto or a QuickBooks. So we're getting the ability now to get payroll information out, potential wage subsidy information out, but all these pieces in here are opportunities to take a lift off of the providers and create these pipelines into your state. What does that mean? Well, that means we could end up with something that looks a little bit more like this. You're taking all those lines that the providers had in the previous slide and you're streamlining it into one system. Ideally, sorry, can everyone see the slides? Everyone see these slides okay? Are we on the ECE ecosystem future state? I see a thumbs up.
Yes,
All right,
you're
Yes.
good.
so I'm going to keep going. Okay, so we've got the providers now. Ideally, we can get them dealing with a single system. And what that means is they're dealing with their child care management system, and that system is then pipelining data into, it could go directly into your state, it could go directly into a department, or it could go into an operational data store. It's a centralized file cabinet in the sky. I think Tammy kind of refers to it as a roundabout, like a traffic roundabout where data flows in one side. It kind of knows what exit it needs to get off, and it finds the route it needs to take. So what you're doing here is you're reducing a lot of the overhead of the provider and making it a simplistic interface with them using the software that they know and they use on a day-to-day basis, and you're pipelining that data into your state. So with that, we are going to get into the goals and vision of how this came about within Iowa. So I will kick it off. I will go on mute now. That's it from me, but feel free to pop questions in chat. We'll try to answer them as we go.
Thanks, Adam. So really, this has been in the works for a while, right? Actually, I remember talking with Tammy multiple years ago about this idea. But what really gave us the energy to get started was our governor's child care task force. So in 2021, she pulled that together. And so we had people from outside of the usual suspects, right? We've got businesses and Iowa workforce development and all kinds of partners, all focused on childcare and what do we want to do to help make that more accessible and more affordable within our state. And so one of the recommendations that came out of that report was around shared services and the benefits it could provide for our state. So really, we came out with a charge out of that governor's task force to lead the state into a more technology-friendly shared services vision for childcare. So it was really kind of twofold in that we wanted to support businesses, childcare businesses. We want them to be able to be more sustainable and get efficiencies that they did not have before. But also, we wanted to be able to use that data for things like making sure that parents knew where there were vacancies and um, and on the state level that we could track where our gaps were. Um, you know, like many states, we had at the time licensed capacity. That doesn't necessarily mean, right, that's how many individual or how many children that particular individual childcare program is actually going to take. So we knew we had a hole in our vision as far as what the needs were and seeing that on the ground. So that our vision really was to fix some of those things. We wanted to reduce the amount of time that providers were spending on those tasks. At the same time, we wanted to improve the publicly available data on childcare. We had some available data on childcare, but it wasn't updated in real time or near real time. And so parents would get a list of childcare providers that they thought had vacancies, and then they call and those vacancies are gone. So that really was a big piece of it, as well as making sure that data was near real time so it's very usable for parents. And I know I didn't individually hit all the bullets, but I think you get kind of the gist, and I will hand it over to Heather.
All right. Thanks, Wendy, for the setup. So as Adam alluded, I'm the university partner on this project, and I'm going to walk you through a little bit about how we got down this windy road to being able to show you the fun, shiny dashboards and search that I know everyone's here for. So I'm going to speak very quickly so you can get to the fun part with Amy. But I do think it's important to just highlight some of the steps along the way. If you're going to build something like this, we understood it takes a lot of looking under the hood. You got to understand, what are all the data resources that exist? What do you want to be building? Is there trust for data sharing? Data sharing is not an easy task, and you have to have a lot of engagement and a lot of discussion and communications about data sharing before you can get to the point where Adam's slide is realistic of being able to put all of those 5 buckets into one data resource. One of the things that really helped us in Iowa was that we kind of had a head start on a lot of that. So I have had the good fortune of being able to work with HHS for many years before we even started this on another data system project, which is outside the scope of what we're going to talk about today, but feel free to look up I2D2 if you want more background on that. But we had some experience already with what are some of the data that we're talking about. And we had some data sharing agreements in place. So those conversations about how to build it were already partway there, so that we could almost start at step 3 on this roadmap here and say, what is it that we exactly want to do? How can we integrate the exact data that we need? And then how do we want to visualize this on dashboards and searches? So, but those 2 steps, I really will say those are foundational and really helped us kind of springboard into translating our use cases into the actual technology solution. So if any of you are interested in that, feel free to reach out. We could share more about some of that early process, but those foundational pieces were really important. And now I'm also going to pass it over now to Tammy, who's going to talk more about the partnership and how that was just really critical for putting all the glue together to make the system run.
Thanks, Heather. So really building the relationships, and Heather alluded to that, was critical to the success of this project, from the beginning, and really it continues today. It's really important to keep everyone connected to the project and understand the intended outcomes and the value proposition for families, for childcare businesses, employers, economic development leaders, and even looking at local communities in the state at the highest level. We really engaged from the beginning our data sharing privacy security team, helping them to understand the project and to understand how that the project impacts all of those levels of stakeholders. It also helped, I felt we also took time, through those meetings to make the personal connection. So in that, for them personally, how does childcare, because childcare is in the news all the time these days, and the need and lack of childcare, but how, whether they have children in childcare now, or maybe many years ago, or they currently have grandchildren, but really how the project connects with them. That seemed to really streamline and make all of our partners engaged from the very beginning. And then when we brought in the attorneys, looking at data sharing, I had one attorney say, yeah, my child's in childcare, because when I explained, oh, you go to childcare, there's a QR code posted, you scan it if they're using a childcare management system. And so he definitely made that connection of, oh, I see how this will help, especially when we, part of our project connects our childcare subsidy to our childcare management systems through Iowa Child Care Connect. So the engagement at all levels, these involved and impacted the project, from our state IT system, staff that work on our different systems, for example, for childcare subsidy or a data warehouse, where multiple systems in our childcare infrastructure the data goes to. Also, even at like the state IT system infrastructure, so the state network administrator, the state enterprise architect, all those individuals were involved in our project and connected to it. And when I got the IT staff that were directly connected to our systems, they were also those advocates to make sure things were progressing forward. And if there were little hiccups in the way, they were making those connections and getting resolution fairly quickly. We also really involved our partners at Child Care Resource and Referral, childcare nurse consultants, staff within our department that work directly with childcare, whether they're policy or in the field, or also we have some centralized units that work with our childcare subsidy. We had a work group that included stakeholders that provided input into the development of our use cases, like what was our intended outcome of what we wanted developed in C3. And then we started to work and understand our intended use. When we started our work, we looked at the intended use and our existing childcare search application that was available in the state. Through our meetings and the work and collaboration with our partners, we determined we needed to build a different childcare search tool that would better integrate the data and really meet parents' needs. We provided to keep that engagement, with partners there, and the partners even, I'm including childcare businesses. We did monthly project updates that were distributed to providers and stakeholders that were interested and involved in our childcare system in Iowa, ranging from childcare, the Child and Adult Care Food Program food sponsors and state level CACFP staff, to local leaders in business and economic development that are currently engaged in childcare solutions locally, as well as local and state work groups and organizations that specifically are organized around childcare or connect with childcare providers, such as Early Childhood Iowa Area Boards, which are centered around programs and services in communities related for families families or for children prenatal through age 5. And also thinking about our extension and outreach staff that are through Iowa State University. But keeping them all involved, our monthly updates were for about a year, and then we made updates to change those to less frequent cadence, but it really kept, continued to keep people informed. And we shared those extensively. Those updates are available. So if you are curious, out on our the Health and Human Services, Iowa Health and Human Services website under childcare, and there's Iowa Child Care Connect is a section under there. Also critical for us is we had a cadence of meetings. So those were with our contractors, whether that was Iowa State University and their subcontractor Resultant, the childcare management system vendors, and then staff from other systems that we connected to. So for example, we make connections between Iowa Child Care Connect and the data system CCR&R, Child Care Resource and Referral uses, called NDS. Besides those connections and keeping people informed, our partners, I also felt it was important to celebrate the successes with everyone. So definitely, as things were published or we moved into implementation, we celebrated and acknowledged everyone's connection to our project and really celebrated the success. Things, for you, if you're considering something to move forward in your state, you want to consider who you need buy-in from, who you need to include for feedback and how to brief them and keep them updated, and scheduling those meetings. Also, again, the project updates inside and outside your organization and who those partners are in those communication menu options. And then the other thing is looking for opportunities for feedback and acknowledging different opinions, knowledge, and experiences. We had a work group and we could now actually have circled them back, looking at what are some potential enhancements or opportunities that have come up as people are using the tools in Iowa Child Care Connect. So I'm going to turn it back over to Wendy.
Thanks, Tammy. So we thought we'd also give you a heads up on a few potential pitfalls that you might run into if you're thinking about this or starting on this road. One of the challenges we really faced was we needed a dedicated staff time for project management. I didn't get any new staff to complete this project, right? Luckily, we were able to relieve Tammy of some other duties that she previously had, which gave her more time on this project. But you really need someone that can spend the time managing the project, putting all the meetings together, herding all the cats, those types of things that just really need to happen to keep the forward momentum going. And as most of you may have realized, as Tammy was talking, she's very good at that, very detailed. So I would suggest if you have somebody that is very detail oriented, that would be a good choice for a project manager. Also, we needed to make those hard decisions. You can't please everyone with how you put this together. And so we needed the buy-in leadership to make those decisions. And so sometimes it was a decision I could make, but sometimes it went above me. And so getting that feedback loop going and making sure that your leadership is on board with the project and able to give you those decisions, and kind of knowing who the decision maker is, because from day to day that sometimes changes. Another challenge we had is the time gap between when we started talking about this project, the idea and the vision, and when we actually launched it. So once we started talking about that vision, right, people wanted it yesterday. Like they pushed and they wanted us to do it fast. So we had to be firm and we had to say, you know, we're going to build this the right way. We need to explore all these data pieces and make sure we're putting the security in place, that we're, you know, dotting all the T's, crossing all the I's. And so really making sure that and Tammy did a great job of communicating that, the reasons why we were going at the pace we were going, because everybody wanted it right away. And then the last one is really just be flexible as you go through a project like this. Things are going to go wrong. Things are going to come up that you weren't prepared for, no matter how detailed your planning was. And so just to be aware of that and be ready to pivot and make changes. And then I will pass it on to whoever is next.
I will take it, Wendy. So, as it was really apparent as that team started talking, they did so much work to make this be successful, and it was the human work. Honestly, the work of human to human is the hardest part of any technology project. The technology is actually the easy part. But getting all the people lined up, communicating really well, and getting that put together is really hard. The thing that made this project possible is that Head Start that they talked about earlier. That was years worth of work that was already done. Another thing that helped this be, I'm going to call this a little bit more, maybe less painful than what some technology projects are, is that Tammy and Wendy and team were open to a lot of possible roads to get the work done. So they didn't come into this and say, okay, we're going to buy this new system and everybody's going to change systems and it's going to work. But they also didn't come into this and say, okay, we're going to custom create something and we're going to make that work. Instead, they came into the game and said, let's figure out the road that makes the most sense in Iowa. And I cannot emphasize enough how important that is. So the pathway that made the most sense in Iowa was to not change the existing infrastructure, to not purchase a new childcare subsidy management system or a childcare licensing system or change what the CCR&R was using, but instead to take the approach of connecting the existing systems. So not buying a whole new thing and moving everybody into this whole new thing. That may not be the reality for where you are. And I just want to be really clear that my mom would always say there's a lot of roads to get to Walmart. That's true with this too. Like there's a lot of roads that can get you here. So the Iowa road may not be the right road. And what matters is that you're able to find a partner to look at this objectively with you. So like, honestly, Adam is a good starting point for you to reach out to and be like, hey, we have an idea. Can you get us started with where to think about this? But you want to be careful that you don't have a predetermined road in mind. It may not be the smartest way for you to get it done in your state. So the concept of building bridges allowed Iowa to let each individual entity hang on to what they were already using that was working. That also meant they were letting childcare providers do that. So creating a system where childcare providers could keep, if they were using some of these different childcare management systems, they could keep it and we could connect it all to this central hub. So again, focused not on changing people and having to do the change management of getting the licensing department, the resource and the referral, and childcare subsidy all on board with new systems, but connecting those systems in a way that still protected privacy and security. Did allow for a faster pathway than what a lot of the other possible pathways would be. And again, may not be right for everybody, but those bridges amongst these opened a lot of doors. So now, as Tammy and Wendy continue to move forward, If they choose to continue to add additional childcare management systems to it, the system is built so that can happen. If later on down the road, their childcare licensing system or subsidy system, they're going to change up who the vendor is or how they're managing those systems, that puzzle piece can be swapped out because of the way the infrastructure was built. The other thing that's really important to remember is as you're building these bridges, you need to know what questions you're going to answer. So you have to be clear on what questions really matter first. And you need to dream big. Because when you're building the infrastructure, when you're building the bones for this, you want to build bigger bones than what you're ready for right now. So make sure that what questions do you need the answers to? Wendy mentioned this really early on, but one of the questions that they started asking from the governors, we have licensed capacity, but people are still saying there's not enough childcare. Why? Why? What's going on? And getting to the root of some of those things was a core task here. So I'm going to grab this screen really quick, and we're going to go ahead and jump in and look at things. Okay, so in theory, you are now looking at Iowa's Child Care Connect.
We
All
are.
right, Adam gave me the nod, so I
Yep.
think we're good. All right, so I want to first say that what you were going to look at today is open. Tammy, if I could impose on you to ask you to drop the link in the chat for everybody so that they could get in and look at it, I would greatly appreciate that. But this is all publicly available that you can get in and poke around and play with it yourself. If you're like me, sometimes it's a little bit easier to process and see what's there this way. There is additional work that exists under the hood that we're not going to look at. Tammy alluded to some of that earlier, where there's some automation of attendance and payment work that's able to happen because of the childcare management system integration. So there is more than what we'll see today. But again, this is just, even just the stuff that we can show you is pretty awesome. So first, let's talk about childcare search. So I've got a couple locations already populated in here, and childcare search is something that we all have, right? We have this in every single state. But one of the challenges that we knew was a very, very real challenge was that in the existing childcare search methods, the timeliness of vacancy data is really not where we want it to be. So as you can see, when this pops up, we have two different colors of providers that pop up right away. So they're either red or they're green. So this is populating automatically with their vacancy data. If childcare providers are connected to their childcare management system, this is refreshing every night. So anytime that opening comes up in their software, then it automatically populates here. So families can click on this information and get real, accurate data. Now, I know that some of you are probably saying to yourselves, but wait a second, not everybody has a childcare management system. You're totally right. They don't. And Tammy and team really thought about that. So if we switch over here and we start looking at the list of providers, let's say that this is who you are, and you're worried about, oh, wait, I'm showing up as red and I'm not red. Like I have openings right now. They can actually go down here and click on it and update it. And then it'll be refreshed the next day. I have gotten myself in trouble a couple of times doing this demo where I thought that there were openings and then I went to show it to people and the openings had refreshed overnight and they weren't there anymore. So it definitely does work. Additionally, there are lots of avenues that we allow for people to be able to communicate their openings. So there's also a form that goes out through the CCR&R where they can really quickly in a couple of clicks update that information. They can call their CCR&R and update that information. Like going for those lots of roads to Walmart, we tried to make it all available with the goal being that this is friendly and accessible for childcare providers. As you can see, it has a lot of what you would expect it to have. And as we apply different filters, then it will change who's available to match. Over here, it'll tell me if it's a perfect match or if there's no matches. This is particularly relevant if you've got a couple of kiddos. And you need to find one that's got a match for both kiddos, but like this, where you see here, it only has one match. So both kids that I put in won't fit. So lots of great possibilities. You can go through and star these childcare providers and then go and look at them on your favorites list to do a comparison. This is a space where you can build in a lot of consumer education, and that's what Iowa did. As you'll notice, it automatically defaults to listing the highest quality rated provider first. You'll recognize some of the information from standard childcare resource and referral information that we want to make sure that families have access to. So do they have experience in training with children with special needs? Are they accepting those childcare subsidies? Is it a center or a home? A lot of that. You can download this, print it off. You can click straight through to do a phone call if you're on your cell phone or to do an email, trying to make this really user-friendly. Another one that's really worth looking at is what it looks like in a rural area, because for those of you not familiar with Iowa, there are a lot of rural areas in Iowa, and it needed to work for those families as well. So if I'm looking at a rural area, it might look a little not awesome as I'm looking at it. So let's go ahead and put in that I have those 2 kiddos again. And look at that. And it looks like I only have one provider who has an opening, which might not feel very good, so that you feel like you have no options. You can change how far off of your route from home to the office, and make it maybe 5 miles off the route, and it opens up a lot more. You can make it 10 miles off the route, which for those of you who are like me, who've lived out in the country your whole life, you know that 10 miles off the route's not actually that far. It might be that far just to go get yourself gas. So, or in my case, it's to go get a Diet Coke. But lots of really good options and ways to make this work. And so all of this has really been thought through carefully to make this as user-friendly for families as they possibly could. One of the beautiful things that happened as we were looking at this is employers realized they could use this for their families as they're bringing in and recruiting. So they started to be able to tell people, wait a second, this neighborhood would be a neighborhood that might work for you because the route from here to the office is going to have a lot more options. And they could in real time have HR departments accessing this information. It made it easier for the child care resource and referral to do referrals where they felt really good about how they were connecting families. And all of this was done because the information became automated. I feel like I'm getting ready to do an infomercial with what I'm going to say next, but wait, there's more. So in addition to doing the childcare search, there's also a series of dashboards that came with it. The dashboards, and when they were first being thought through and created, were really something that Tammy, Wendy, and team were thinking about. What do they need in their day-to-day function, and what do the people that work with them directly need? As a happy accident, it works for a lot of communities as well. So you'll see here exactly what we were talking about earlier. One of the biggest ahas that we had was the difference between operational and registered or licensed capacity. So you'll notice the total supply changes pretty dramatically when we look at those two. So why is that? So that operational capacity we were able to get to as the real number, that's the functional number. It's taking into account how many teachers do I have? Do I have a classroom that I can't open right now because I don't have staff for it? It's taking into account, I have a gym and I'm never going to run that as a classroom. That is licensed for 20 kids, but I'm not going to have 20 kids in there other than when it's the gross motor time. And it corrects for all of that. Lots and lots of work went onto the back end to get to that number, but I would say this is one of the aha spaces that really helped us understand that this licensed capacity is the absolute ceiling, the most children we can possibly care for in the state of Iowa. This operational capacity is the number to drive upwards to make sure families have the care that they need. And that's the number we need to be watching when we're trying to figure out how to meet families where they are. Both of them are good to know, and you need to know both. But it's important to understand the story that they each tell. We have our supply by quality rating indicator down here, the CCR&R areas. But then we also have a supply and demand actual visualization. So we have a lot of ways to look at demand. Demand right now is a really tricky thing to sort out. So 100% of all children born in Iowa don't actually need care. We all already know that to be true. Some families are choosing to have a parent stay home. Some might have another family member or alternate arrangements. So then you've got to try and correct for how many children are actually in the care system. So the 67% is a specific to Iowa number. It is taking into consideration the percentage of families that are have both caregivers in the workforce and that are choosing to use a regulated care provider. This is one of those where you want to work with a good partner to figure this out. Iowa State University was one of the partners that was pivotal here because they have the research expertise to help us figure out what that right number is. But you need a partner who will walk alongside that journey with you. All right, so we get our demand up here, and you can look at it by age group and see some pretty stark changes. So if we look at this at school agers, look at all that happy green. We have lots of spots for our school agers. When we look at infants, I think you all can anticipate exactly what's about to happen. It gets really, really red. But again, that's information you need to know. We need to be able to raise up, hey, when we're thinking about funding changes, when we're thinking about setting rates for childcare subsidy, our infant age group is where we have a really critical need. But without the data, you don't know that. And so you don't know, and you can't prove what you're saying and the story that you're telling. Same thing with talking to employers about why they can't recruit people. Well, maybe it's because you need to work with your local child cares and help subsidize some slots for infants for your employees. These are really real conversations that can happen now that haven't been able to happen before. The other one that's really fantastic is just looking at this vacancy dashboard. So again, you can break it down by looking at the different age groups, and you can see specifically how many vacancies across the state do we have that are, and break it down even more, and you can look at specific counties. And this is what families are really experiencing, right? Where you have 2 vacancies in the whole that are available for your infant. But then the other place that we've had a lot of success is looking at it by county. So to be able to get in here and say, okay, I know from an economic development perspective that we're getting ready to put a new factory here. So is there sufficient childcare to make that happen? Do I have childcare in the surrounding counties that's going to meet that need? But actual county planning can happen this way. And you can start some really robust conversations and help move things forward in a pretty powerful way. All right, I want to make sure there's still time for us to have a robust conversation around any of these pieces. But I hope that this is something that you guys can feel inspired by and think about the possibilities of. And if you have a chance to get in there and play around with it, you can imagine what it could do for you and your team.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Amy. That's awesome. First question that we had here was, we talked about it a little bit for demand. How do you determine demand? And I think that one is, I don't know, Heather, if you have that off the top of your head right now, we could talk about, or if we could talk about, are there search criteria or R&R feedback? I mean, what are the data points that we're looking at for demand information?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So demand, without surveying every family and asking them if they need care, that's a hard one to get at, right? We brainstormed, there's national estimates you can grab, right? That might show you by state or county. How many kids do we think are in the state, or what percentage of families do we think are in the state that might need care? We, again, because of the project that we'd worked on before C3, we were familiar with our Iowa birth records that can tell us where exactly children are born in the state. So we had discussions about, could we use these data as part of our demand estimate to then layer on where children live and estimate how many of those we think will need care. So we married those birth record data with some other estimates of children who have parents in the workforce and other choices that families make that render them needing care or not needing care. And that's why our dashboard has 3 levels of demand that you can choose. So you can say, I want a real, optimistic look, or however you want to phrase it, but I want to look at all 100% of children born in the state of Iowa. And because they're birth records with dates on them, we can project kids out, right? So a child that was born 4 years ago, today we can say they're 4 years old. So they're 4 years old today if they need care. So we can use those birth records and take a look at kids across time and where demand might be. But we can also then layer on top of those percentages of those kids, what we estimate their care needs might be. Now, this is one of the areas I'm really excited about because there's lots of other data points we could consider that could make that estimate even better, right? And so, as we're talking about, well, what about child care tax credits? What about workforce data? There's all kinds of ideas of ways that you could better estimate that number, but that's how we started and that's what's there now, our estimates based on birth record data for the state.
Awesome. Thank you. Next question, does the platform accommodate families who are looking for part day or part week enrollment? What about occasional enrollment? That one's going to get very specific in terms of like, I need Monday, Wednesday,
Yeah.
Friday, or something like that. So I don't know if that's.
It does have the ability for you to go in and select the specific kind of schedule that you're looking for. So under the provider schedule, you can drop down days of the week that you're looking for, hours of care that you're looking for. All of that is something that you could set up so that it worked for your state. So, and that needs to look different in every state. So that is something to keep in mind, this is what worked and made sense in Iowa. There was a lot of conversation and hashing out and actual pictures drawn on the wall of how this needed to look. And I can't even tell you the number of photographs of charts that we have to try and figure it out, but you need to do that, right? Also, the resource center for all needs to be part of those conversations. I just can't emphasize this enough that it worked in Iowa because they were part of the conversation. But yeah, super possible to consider part-time, full-time. It's complicated. And that is actually a space where the technology is harder than the humans, because on the back end, you have to make sure the computer understands what you're telling it to do.
And then the next one is, this one's a bit broader. I'm not sure how we would want to answer this one, but it's basically how would you replicate this in other states? And I'll start with this one because I think I can feed into it a bit. But Amy, you touched on this. When you're doing technical builds and technology integrations, the first thing I go is, what do you need, right? And the way I do that is not what do you need technically, what do you need answers to? And you know that question, right? And you know that question from top to bottom, whereas I'm going in and I'm saying, what do you need? And as you go down, you get more granular, right? And the roll-up reports go up and the roll-up reports go across. And I think that's where the inclusion, what I did here that I've seen that worked really well was the inclusion of everybody, getting everything on the table from the very, like the person who just started and is in that entry level role saying, I need this information to do my job better, to all the way up to the governor, right? And I think that's what, when you talk about getting everything on the table and building your structure early that you talked to and you alluded to, Amy, it's so much easier technically to build for future plans now, even if you don't need them now. Something that you can branch out. Well, eventually I'll need this. Well, I can start to lay out some frameworks and foundational pieces and data structures that'll capture all this information when we're ready to flip that switch. So I don't know if anybody else wants to add to that a little bit, but the first thing that I would do if I was thinking about this as a state level is get all the questions on board and all the people on board. And when I say all the people, it's like you could have representatives from all departments, but you need to make sure you're going across and up and down. You can't just say, I'll take one person out of this department. That person might not have all the experience and angles at which you need to look at this information. So that would be my 2 cents. I will kick it over to the rest of the folks to say, what other points do you feel like were really important to getting this working?
So I will say one thing that I'm happy to volunteer my colleague Peter Anderson for. Um, but I'm not volunteering myself because I'm getting ready to go on maternity leave. So full disclosure, I'm just making him take one for the team here. But one of the things that might be helpful for some people if you're interested in getting started, reach out to Adam. You can also reach out to Peter, and maybe do like a 60-minute little like brainstorming kind of gap analysis conversation. This is what we're imagining. This is what we think we want. Like, is there a direction that makes sense? Sometimes just getting a thought partner who's done this before can be really, really helpful in at least knowing where to go, right? At least having a direction. And so that's an actual really practical thing that you could do. But I do think that Adam is really right that the first most important thing to do is to sit down and write down the questions you need answered. Like actually write them out. What do I need to know the answers to that I don't now? What do I dream that I could answer that I can't right now? And the technology should come towards the end state, right? Don't start with, if I buy this cool shiny thing, it will fix everything. Don't start there. That's a way to lots of sadness. Start with the solutions you need and then walk backwards to get the technology because there's always a cool new shiny thing to buy, guys. There always is. But maybe that's not what you need. Maybe there's an easier answer.
Mm. And I think that's a good point too, because I do, I have heard in other states like, well, this system doesn't work, or this part of this system doesn't work. So, it becomes a pain point and a let's get rid of it rather than let's fix it type of deal. And that's tricky. I mean, I always analogy these pieces to mechanics because I don't know anything about cars. Know a ton about tech, but I know nothing about cars. If my car starts making a noise, I'm completely lost. I go into the mechanic, I'm like, it's broken, right? I need your help. So I think that thought partner and that person that can, a lot of times people ask me, look, these are the two options I'm thinking about. Okay, well, that one's going to be real hard and that one's going to be real easy, right? So just having somebody be able to identify those paths and those pain points that you might hit, or options for you later. And I'll echo Amy's point as well about if you come with the plan, that makes it really hard to pivot. It makes it really hard to come in, you come in with a diagnosis and you say, this is, if I went to the mechanic, I said, oh, this is definitely the problem. Then they got to back out and they got to reassess it, right? And so there's a lot of benefit to brainstorming to start and then looping someone in. The other thing that Iowa did very, very well is parsed out a person, Tammy, right? Heroic Tammy. I'm going to give you the heroic label with it. Buy you a cape, Tammy. Giving her that role and letting her be that person that communicated and coordinated and collaborated and was that central hub. It's kind of the ODS of a project, right? You were that middle person, Tammy, that knew where the questions needed to go to get answered. You knew who owned it. You basically knew how to phrase like, this is our stuck point. This is where we need to get over. Analyzing those pieces as well is important. Understanding where you're stuck, what's a pain point internally. And then from our perspective, we're always, at OpX, we're looking at provider first. So some of those complexities oftentimes get pushed out of the state. It's like, oh, this is a hard thing for me. We'll put it in a form and have a provider fill it out. But we really want that provider experience to be as streamlined as possible. So we're always looking at that, trying to detangle that complexity for the provider. So having a provider voice, interviewing a lot of providers, that's typically one of the first things we would recommend is asking your providers what the pain points are, asking them where they're entering duplicative information. They'll share. They're not a quiet group. They're very open with their feedback. So I appreciate that. I like hearing that, and I think it ties in well to this connectivity piece that states are looking to do right now. So for me, that's an exciting piece. But there's a lot of this. It is challenging because it is such a massive project. So it's like, where do I even start? I mean, that's the pain point that we've been trying to figure out at OpX is like, what can we start to give that's a little bit more tactical that folks can take back checklists and goals and smaller pieces. So, I would love it if you did get stuck, if you are overwhelmed, to ping me and say, Adam, this is really where I'm having trouble getting the rubber to meet the road. So I think we put out a lot of toolkits, we put out a lot of information on the Opportunities Exchange website, and that's one of the big pieces that I still feel is missing. So happy to answer questions in chat now if you have them, or again, you can ping me afterwards. I do have one more. Is there any for public pre-K, do we have any information on public pre-K supply data, or is that kind of out of scope with this, or where are we at with that?
So between Heather and I, maybe we can
for it.
hit on that. So it's because of how C3 is built and how nimble and to add additional data sources, it's always a possibility in the future. But it'll just take to, to go back and ask kind of what the need is, the use. Also, like, how does that data come in and interface with the existing? Because definitely it can be added, but then it's working with our partners at because it's within a different department for that interest, and also engaging school districts which do our pre-K program, state funded pre-K program. And then thinking about how that integrates. So for example, and I might not have heard Amy say it, but in that childcare search, a parent can go in and click on a button to look at compliance and complaint reports. So it takes it currently over to HHS's website for compliant and complaint reports. And you can, individual can look at those for a specific provider. So for pre-K, statewide voluntary pre-K program in Iowa, there are no compliant and complaint reports. So it's thinking about too how those interfaces happen if you're using the child care search, and then how you'd build out or understand too on the data dashboards, because definitely it brings in and with the supply. So if you think about it and you look at, oh, we have a large, the supply for 4-year-olds is more towards green on the data dashboards when we look at supply and demand. But it, knowing, and when I talk about the dashboards with people, I make sure that they understand pre-K programs are not in this dashboard. So yes, there might be an oversupply, or the supply meets demand per se for the 4-year-olds, but it might be because for childcare, those slots are not being filled because pre-K programs are taking and meeting that need.
Heather, do you want to add to that at all, or are you good? Nope. Okay. And then the last question here, for the data sharing agreement, Tammy, is that something that you have? Is that something that's available to see? Is that, or how would you recommend states kind of get over that hurdle of a data sharing agreement?
They would, I mean, because our documents, because we're a public entity, the data sharing agreements would be available that we could share. We are moving in kind of to our next phase soon here, looking at entering into data sharing agreements with other childcare management system software vendors that are interested in connecting to C3 with a data sharing agreement, and actually building at their own expense the what's called API, that data bridge to connect. So those data sharing agreements are in process. Once we determine to move forward with have the documents that are posted out on our website, which will be happening fairly soon, to be able to share those once some of those are executed.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, thank you all. I appreciate everybody's attendance here. I hope this helped you think about your state and your district or county and how you can maybe make this thing happen. Again, it needs a lot of people in the room. So getting all the people buy-in is one of the first important steps. And then we'd be happy to help where we can. Give us a shout out. again, we'll be sharing this out. We'll be sharing the recording, sharing the PowerPoint, sharing all the links. We'll be sharing all the resources that we popped into chat. So everything will go out in an email here in the next week or so. So you can definitely find us at that point. So we thank you all. Appreciate the panel here for the help, and have a good rest of your day. Do what Tammy, yeah, what would Tammy do? Great point. Get that right, Tony. Thanks, everybody.